Wow, man. Well, after so much growth the last few months, it is refreshing to see a stable week in the space. That's a sign of normalcy, as you
hmm
pointed out, too. Lots of trading still going on. And yeah, absolutely. Thanks to the strong community for coming out there. A lot of votes. I think it was our second biggest poll when it comes to votes, over 1,200. So really, really incredible response. And special shout out to the Ravencoin community for a victory there. And with that, I think we can segue, Kyle, into our main topic for the episode.
Let's do it. So today we're going to be reviewing that SEC no action letter that was released last Friday regarding security tokens, or as they phrase it, digital asset securities.
Yeah, I don't love that term, Kyle, but it seems that's what the SEC is referring to as security tokens, of course. So, not sure why it couldn't just be digital securities instead of digital asset securities, but what can you do, huh? Before we go over the actual content of the letter, though, I want to make sure our listeners are all on the same page when it comes to actually what a no action letter is. So, in the world of capital markets, of course, the SEC is the police. And as the regulator, they need to enforce a lot of cases and a lot of rules. And so, in some cases, they issue no action letters to where cases where they settle with an issuer, for example, and let them know that they're not going to continue with enforcement. In other cases, they are issued when there are gray areas in the industry. Professionals require clarity from the SEC. In all these scenarios, the no action letter represents what it sounds like, meaning the SEC will take no action against you. So each no action letter, of course, then sets a precedent in the industry in the context of what it was released around. And in this case, the SEC released a no action letter in response to questions from a joint staff statement released back in July of 2019 regarding custody of digital asset securities from the SEC and FINRA.
Absolutely right, Herwig. So in this case, the no action letter is addressing the ATS's role in the settlement of digital asset security trades. In fact, the letter is addressed to a vice president at FINRA, suggesting that this might have been incited by internal meetings between the two on the subject. And in the spirit of staying away from jargon, let's just cover what an ATS stands for, and that stands for an alternative trading system, which is essentially a secondary market for private securities that's operated directly by a broker-dealer. No national stock exchanges currently support security tokens, and broker-dealer ATSs have really been the only solution for secondary market trading of tokenized securities. However, many questions have revolved around trading security tokens and who custodies them or who holds the responsibility of those assets. A lot of different lawyers, investment bankers, and industry leaders will give you different answers on how the SEC treats security tokens, but the general consensus is that the SEC does not allow for blockchain-based settlement of securities, and therefore the blockchain is only acting as a registry tool. This creates new questions regarding custody and settlement for the industry. The no action letter from Friday now outlines a second way that ATSs can now settle security tokens or digital asset securities without concern of the consequences that if they follow these steps. Herwig, do you want to explain the first and explain to our listeners what this new model is and how they compare?
Sure, with pleasure. The original settlement model outlined by the SEC in 2019 was a four-step process that goes as follows. Step one, the buyer and seller send their respective orders to the ATS. Step two, the ATS matches the order as they are supposed to do. And step three, the ATS notifies the buyer and seller of the match trade, ending with step four, the buyer and seller settling the transaction bilaterally, either directly with each other or by instructing their respective custodians to settle the transaction on their behalf. However, this method brought up concerns from the industry and pressed for another simpler approach. So the SEC has allowed and clarified on this model, which goes as follows. Step one, the buyer and seller send their respective orders to the ATS, notify their respective custodians of their respective orders submitted to the ATS, and instruct their respective custodians to settle transactions in accordance with the terms of their orders when the ATS notifies the custodians of a match on the ATS. So I just want to rephrase step one there, just to be very clear, everyone. Basically, it's the ATS, the custodian, working back with each other as the order is submitted. It's almost like you're giving the custodian or the ATS and the custodian the right to settle with each other, through each other.
On your
right?
behalf.
So they're
the agents for that.
Exactly. So step 2, the ATS then matches those orders after they've been received. And step 3, the ATS notifies the buyer and seller and, of course, their respective custodians of the match trade, and the custodians carry out, of course, the conditional instruction. So given what you just said, Kyle, know everything that we just described is, of course, happening programmatically on chain. So this is very important that this is a simple, quick step between everything.
Right. So to make sure it's clear to everyone, what this no action letter from the SEC does is tell the ATS operators that are transacting security tokens that if they choose to follow the 3-step process, they will not receive action against them by the SEC, which is great news because it provides a second method of doing this. And as you said, the blockchain speeds this process up and automates a lot of this jargon. So potentially this 3-step process makes it much simpler. Brian Brooks at the OCC actually said this was a smart move towards investor protections.
But it does come with some caveats as well, right, Kyle? In order to follow this 3-step model, the broker-dealer needs to also have at least $250,000 in cash on hand in reserve. That the agreements also between the broker-dealer and their customers need to clearly state that the broker-dealer operator does not guarantee or otherwise have responsibility for settling the trades, and that efforts are taken to establish that such securities are properly registered or exempted, and that all applicable securities laws are, of course, followed, which then, of course, brings up some questions like, why do you need that cash on hand? Additionally, other securities attorneys jumped in to complicate the leather further. Questions around the role of the transfer agent in all of this, as suggested by Brian Farber, the general counsel of Securitize. Another question from Drew Hinks of Carlton Fields asks, regarding Rule 15C3-3B, which is regarding custody, under which the broker-dealer must obtain and maintain physical possession or control of all fully paid or excess margin securities carried by a broker-dealer for the account of customers. So more and more complications there. Overall, it seems like the SEC is trying to move the industry forward, but hasn't really fully thought about all of the angles here.
Yeah, hopefully our listeners are still following. I know this is incredibly complicated. Sometimes it's easier to read than it is to listen, but it does seem like it's incredibly counterintuitive here to require that the third-party custody agent that represents the buyer and then the other one that represents the seller. It seems really counterintuitive to me to require those same brokers that they must explicitly state that they play no part in settling the trades. Like, I guess the SEC is trying to make a distinction between the independent brokers and then the ATS itself. But then when you tie in this $250,000 cash requirement and the other legalese here, it just seems like this could be really simplified even further. I mean, at this point, I don't see why these outside services can't just be provided by the ATS license as a singular entity. Regardless, this is a big change in direction from the SEC, who has hardly ever hinted towards specific regulation for crypto assets, and now is clearly making a distinction between blockchain native assets and security tokens, which is tremendous progress. Hopefully they continue to move in this direction and continue to provide more clarity, either through publishing more guidance or by offering new opportunities for no-action letters, allowing for better systems to operate despite a lack of specific regulatory clearance.
Totally, and who knows, we might see some active ATSs start to try and implement this 3-step process. And more attention, of course, towards digital asset securities, as the SEC says, and not crypto asset securities, I think is a good thing. At least the SEC is trying to listen to the industry and trying to get it right. So I don't think there's much more need to get into the weeds. As you said, Kyle, we're getting pretty advanced. So I think let's wrap up the show here. I want to thank all of you amazing listeners for tuning in, and to remind you that you can always reach out to us on Twitter or on LinkedIn with questions and feedback on the episode, and that you can join the community at stomarket.com/news, where you can submit articles, you can make comments, you can ask questions with the rest of the community.
Be sure to catch us next week on Tuesday for episode 64. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you next week.